Yeah.
Too much later.
All right. Hi, everyone. We're going to get started pretty soon. Thanks for joining us. Hi, everyone. We're going to get started just in a little bit. We're going to maybe wait a few seconds or so just to let other attendees join the call. Thanks for joining the call. Okay. Hello, thanks for joining us and welcome to the first of 3 webinars that are part of NASIG's Equity and Inclusion Committee's 2022 webinar series. Much thanks to the NASIG Executive Board and the Continuing Education Committee for their support, and the Equity and Inclusion Committee, as well as, of course, Dr. Taylor for this session today. I am Moon Kim, Acquisitions Librarian at Ohio State University, a NASIG member at large, and the liaison to the NASIG Equity and Inclusion Committee. I am also the moderator for today and am privileged to introduce you all to Dr. Leo Taylor, who is also from Ohio State University and will be engaging us on the topic of microaggressions. Dr. Leo Taylor is a program manager for faculty and staff affairs in the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for the College of Food, Agricultural, and Environmental Sciences at the Ohio State University. In this role, he serves as an educator and consultant for the college, university, and broader community. In addition to his work at Ohio State, he delivers local, national, and international workshops on salient diversity, equity, and inclusion topics. He is frequently sought after for consultations on issues such as inclusive and equitable hiring practices, gender identity, pronouns, and implicit bias. Leo was born and raised in Muncie, Indiana, and received both his Bachelor and Master of Science from Ball State University. He received his PhD from Cornell University. Leo has delivered hundreds of workshops, webinars, conference presentations, guest lectures, and keynotes on a variety of DEI topics with a specialty in queer and transgender cultural competencies. Before we get fully started, NASIG's Code of Conduct applies to all discussions and presentations. The link to the Code of Conduct is available on the NASIG website, and I'll put it there in a little bit. NASIG welcomes and values the contributions of all of our colleagues and is respectful and open to different opinions, viewpoints, experiences, and backgrounds. Please be respectful of our community's diversity and be generous to other individuals' perspectives. And I'll just thank everyone here in advance for their part in celebrating our community's diversity. I believe Dr. Taylor will also go over some community norms shortly. This webinar is meant to be interactive, and there will not be time set aside for questions and answers at the end. So please feel free to put your questions into chat as they come up, and Dr. Taylor will get to them. Please note that this webinar will be recorded for later viewing, and the link to Dr. Taylor's slides will be available after the webinar. We're going to wrap up around maybe 3 minutes before the hour to briefly share information about other upcoming sessions in the 2022 Equity and Inclusion webinar series and the vision sessions at the annual conference. At the end of today's session, all attendees will have the opportunity to fill out a survey about this webinar. Now I will let Dr. Taylor take it away. Thank you.
Thanks, Moon. And thank you so much for the invitation to be with you today. It is an honor to speak to you about this topic, and I want to just dive right in. So first, just to give you an idea of what we're going to do today, we're first going to start with the definition to understand what microaggressions are. Then we're going to focus the bulk of today's session on understanding the impact or impacts of common microaggressions. And then finally, I'll conclude with the other side of that coin, which is, we could witness microaggressions, then what do we do if we initiate one? So I'm going to give you some tips on what to do if someone calls you in or calls you out for initiating a microaggression. As Moon indicated, this is a participatory program, so I'm not going to be sitting here talking at you for the next 50 or so minutes. I want this to be engaging, so if you have questions or comments throughout the session, please feel free to put those in chat. And make sure that if you want everyone to see your question or comment, that you select everyone in the to field. However, if you're feeling a little shy today, or you'd rather be a little more private about your comment or question, you're welcome to direct message me by selecting hosts and panelists. I would be happy to share your question or comment without revealing your identity. Today's session is being recorded. Auto transcription is enabled. As Moon said, the slides will be made available to you afterward. Then I want to just point out a couple of other things. First, I'm going to be talking about some specific microaggressions that has language that can be uncomfortable for people who, especially those who've been targeted with that language. So I just want to give you a heads up that some of the language can be triggering, and you need to take care of yourself first and foremost. And secondly, this 1 hour on microaggressions is just going to scratch the surface on this topic. So it's intended to be a beginning or another step in your journey towards self-improvement and awareness. And finally, the community agreement that I'm asking everyone to participate in is the following. In order to create a brave space for learning and sharing, I'm asking that everyone actively participate to the best of your ability. And that's going to be mostly through chat, since we have video and mics disabled. I'm asking that folks maintain an open mind. I enter into these conversations understanding that I have a lot to learn. Yeah, and I really appreciate it when participants act like participant teachers, sharing your knowledge with the rest of the group, because I end up learning something from you as well. I also ask that folks listen to any discomfort that might pop up for you. Sometimes that can be the result of being triggered, but it can also be the result of something coming up that maybe is a lesson we need to learn or a message that we need to hear. And that's something that we call the learning edge. So make a note of that and maybe interrogate it later. Ask yourself, what was it about that made me uncomfortable? And what might I have to learn as a result? And then finally, I ask for a certain degree of confidentiality. If someone reveals something personal here, I'm going to ask that we not reveal their identity, but you can certainly share the lesson that you learned from that individual. All right, so we're going to start by addressing the definition of a microaggression. So I have a brief video for us to watch.
For people who still don't think that microaggressions are a problem.
Oh, you're so well-spoken.
Just imagine, instead of being a stupid comment, a microaggression is a mosquito bite.
Ugh, it's a compliment.
Mosquito bites and their itch are one of nature's most annoying features. But if you're only bitten every once in a while...
No, where are you really from?
Cleveland?
Sure, it's annoying, but it's not that big a deal. The problem is that some people get bitten by mosquitoes a lot more than other people. I mean, a lot more. Whether it's on a date...
Oh, your English is so good.
Excuse me?
Going grocery shopping.
You know, everything happens for a reason.
I'm just buying apples.
Commuting to work.
So when are you gonna have a baby?
Watching TV.
We have to keep the Redskins name. It's part of our culture and history.
Or just walking down the street with your partner.
I couldn't even tell you were gay.
Mosquitoes seem to pop up everywhere.
Do you know John? Give me shopping advice. I love Cher too.
And getting bit by mosquitoes every day.
Can I touch your hair?
multiple times a day
So pretty. Can I
Can I
touch
touch
your
it,
hair?
please? Can I please?
is annoying.
Can I?
And makes you want to go ballistic on those mosquitoes, which seems like a huge overreaction to people who only get bit every once in a while.
It's just a mosquito bite. Who cares? Just another angry black woman.
Of course, beyond just being annoying, some mosquitoes carry truly threatening diseases that can mess up your life for years.
Astrophysics? Maybe you should try less challenging, Major.
Ow, my dreams.
And other mosquitoes carry strains that can even kill you.
He looked like he was up to trouble, okay? I felt threatened.
So next time you think someone's overreacting, just remember, some people experience mosquito bites all the time.
You're all so exotic. Wow.
And by mosquito bites, we mean microaggressions.
All right. In other examples, microaggressions are likened to paper cuts. One every now and then isn't going to be a big deal, but 1,000 paper cuts have a very different experience associated with them. So microaggressions are these brief and commonplace verbal as well as nonverbal and environmental indignities or insults that send very clear messages. They communicate hostile, unwelcoming, derogatory, or negative messages, or simply the message that you are not in the dominant social identity group that this service or this belief serves. Often they are so subtle that they go unnoticed, and many times they're unintentional, and folks are just unaware that they're initiating any kind of harm. And finally, members of oppressed social identity groups are disproportionately targeted by microaggressions. And what I mean by that are people who are not in dominant groups, who are out in the margins of our social culture. The impacts can be quite severe, even though they tend to be subtle and seemingly kind of small. Not only do they erode self-esteem and produce all sorts of negative emotions, they can even cause physical health problems and also shorten a person's life expectancy. So how could this be? Well, the author Maura Cullen described in her book, 35 Dumb Things Well-Intended People Say, that people who experience microaggressions on a regular basis have this thing called this pile-on principle. So the more it happens to them, the more damaging it is. And also, as the video pointed out, they're going to respond in ways that reflect that history with that microaggression. So when you initiate a microaggression and someone reacts in such a way that you think is an overreaction, we need to remind ourselves that that's probably not the first time, maybe even that day that they've experienced that microaggression. It might be the 1,000th time that they've experienced that microaggression. And we need to be gracious with them and with ourselves, understanding the context. So verbal microaggressions, I think, are what we tend to think about when we talk about this topic, but there are also ways that our environment can reinforce this feeling that a person is marginalized. So you've probably all been down the Band-Aid aisle of a store. So who might experience this as a microaggression? Walking through, shopping for Band-Aids, looking for an ace bandage. Or has anyone experienced this as a microaggression, and why? Yes, feel free to chat. We're going to sit in some awkward silence. Yes, there we go. Thank you. Anyone who doesn't match this generic Caucasian, someone haven't until I realized it was to match skin color. That's right. So these were designed to blend in with your skin. And historically, there's been an overrepresentation of people with this, or bandages with this generic Caucasian skin color. So there is a movement here to rectify this situation, and there are companies now producing a wider variety of bandage colors to better meet the needs of people with a less stereotypical Caucasian skin color. So that's an example of an environmental microaggression. Here's another one. Maybe it seems to be more obvious for folks who need to access buildings and they may be impaired in some way. That's kind of obvious, right? But some efforts to remedy that can possibly be even more offensive. So here's a ramp that was constructed parallel to a stairway, but you probably should think twice about going down this ramp, or maybe you do extreme sports. But if you aren't handicapped or disabled by the time you go down this ramp, you might be when you're done. And then here's an example of, oh, we're going to make a locker accessible to a person in a wheelchair, but we're not even going to consider that you can't even get a wheelchair in this space. So this then communicates, oh, we thought of you, sort of, but we really don't have an idea about what your needs are. So, and we're not going to put in the effort to actually make this accessible. Yeah, and there are ADA guidelines. Here's another example of an environmental microaggression. What do you notice here? And maybe someone can relate to this. Yeah, so they're all right-handed, and this happens all the time. So even though left-handedness amounts to about 10% of the world's population, that's still a sizable number of folks who must contend with a scarcity of left-handed desks, but also other supplies that have been designed, yes, and skinny folks. That's a great observation, Cheryl. That notebooks and other sorts of supplies have been designed with the dominant group in mind. Again, we're making progress, so we have notebooks with the spiral wire on the top, so it's accessible to anyone, regardless of their handedness. So there are easy ways that we can work around this. It doesn't have to be a microaggression, but they exist, and left-handed individuals experience this on a regular basis. So many microaggressions are rooted in power disparities between dominant and marginalized groups. So here are some examples that you might have heard before. That's so ghetto, no homo, man up, or you don't sound black. Now, if any of these are unfamiliar to you or you're not sure why they're microaggressions, feel free to mention so in chat and we can discuss that briefly before moving on. Here are a few more. He's a moron. He throws like a girl. She was hysterical and I got gypped. I'm going to check out chat here. Anytime every chair is the same, it's one size fits almost no one. All right. Whether it's because I'm fat or my friend is short or any other variation in bodies. Right. So we have these environments that are set up for this generic human where our diversity is not taken into consideration. So these are some really common phrases that you've probably heard many times. Maybe you've even said some of these. And these are all harmful in their own ways. They're rooted in biased assumptions, biased beliefs, various isms. So he throws like a girl is sexist. It's implying that, being a girl is a bad thing, or girls can't be good at sports. So yes, very embedded, excuse me, in our vernacular. Many times though, the intention isn't bad. And that leads us to the difference between intention versus impact. To illustrate this, I like to use this vase example. So imagine you're washing this vase. It was made for you by a close friend or relative. You cherish it. It's one of your favorite possessions. And as you're washing it carefully, it slips out of your hands and falls to the ground and busts into 100 pieces. Alternatively, different scenario, you're washing the vase, you're being very careful, but then you think of something that really makes you upset, and without even thinking about it, you throw the vase on the floor, and what do you have? You have a vase that's broken into 100 pieces. So same outcome, but different intentions. And that's what we have to keep in mind when we're talking about microaggressions when it comes to thinking about intentionality. And we're going to talk more about that later when it comes to how to respond when you're called out for initiating a microaggression. But this is the context, this is the viewpoint that we need to have in mind. Another thing that I'm going to be providing you with today is a tool. It's a 2-page handout that goes into detail about several different microaggression themes. So as you see here on the screen, alien in one's own land is a theme that comes up over and over again. And there are various microaggression examples, and the message and impact is outlined here. So here's an example. He's gay, but he's like the greatest guy in the world. So an assumption, an embedded bias is at the root of this, but the intention is positive. We're going to go into some examples here together. So for the following examples, I want you to think about what the intention behind it is. Now, sometimes there is no intention. It could just be a slip of the tongue, a word that we're just not even thinking about as offensive, or there could be some sort of biased belief or biased assumption that the microaggression is rooted in. And then secondly, think about what kind of message could be sent or the impact that can be had on people holding the identity that is being targeted. Some of these don't really have a right or wrong answer, and they're highly contextual. You may come up with some answer that's different from someone else, and that's great. We're going to do this chatterfall style, and what I mean by that is type your answer into chat, and I'm going to give you just a few seconds to think about it. Type your answer in, then I'll indicate to hit enter, and then you hit enter to share your answer. So here's the first example. You're having a phone conversation with a white relative when suddenly their doorbell rings. They answer the door and return after a couple minutes. They say, "That was my neighbor. They're black, but really nice." So think about it for just a second. What is the intention or biased assumption here with this comment? Type your answer in chat, but wait to hit enter. Okay, let's see what you came up with. All right, and I apologize, I'm not going to be able to get to everyone's, but we'll highlight some of the themes here. Let's talk about the assumption, right, that Black people aren't nice, that, let's see, compliment their neighbor, correct. So I'm highlighting something good about this neighbor. Black people aren't good neighbors, okay. Black folks are hostile or mean. And so maybe the person is trying to convey, don't worry, my neighbors are Black. I'm not in danger though. I'm safe because they're nice. Let's see, you're all getting to the point. Black people aren't nice. Relative doesn't like Black people, and the person on phone want to appear tolerant. So just a little insight. This is actually something that happened to me. It was one of my relatives, and I was on the phone with her, and she made this comment. So this assumes that Black people are not nice. And typically it's used to reassure other folks that there are some good Blacks out there. That was how I felt anyway when my relative said this. So the impact, and y'all are getting at this already, that this is simply racist and based on stereotypes that have been perpetuated for a very long time. It's damaging not only at the interpersonal level, but also at the societal level. All right, the second example, a parent and their child is walking through a store. The child notices a person with a visible disability or dysmorphia, and by that I mean something different about their body that stands out. And the child holds their gaze at that person. The parent, while avoiding making eye contact with the other person, grabs the child quickly, moves them away from the person, and says with embarrassment, it's impolite to stare. So let's focus on the intention here. What was this parent's intention? Type your answer in chat, give me just a second, and then we'll hit enter. All right, go ahead and hit enter. All right, the intention is to avoid discomfort, intention to make the other person not feel embarrassed by their rude child. And there's an embedded assumption there, right? That staring is rude, or a child looking at someone is rude. Intent to avoid or minimize offense, right? The parent definitely means well. Let's see, let's move on, keep moving for intention. The parent, yes, is trying to teach child manners. Right, okay, so that's great. Those are all great answers. Think now about the impact of the message. So usually this is intended to be an act of kindness and respect for the disabled person. But think now about what message could be received by the person with the disability. So think a minute for your answer. All right, let's go ahead and see what you have. All right. Yes, so that person is other. It's definitely othering them, not like us, possibly not to be interacted with, right? They should be invisible, not seen. Disabled person is told they're different and wrong and to be ashamed, right? Prefer to ignore the person than stand up with child to explaining. Their existence makes others uncomfortable. Yeah, so that's definitely that, you know, that's painful. They feel weird about the person. It's a teachable moment. Yes, that all people are different and it's impolite to stare. The disabled people are embarrassing to be in the presence of. I'm still invisible. Right, so this definitely has all of those components. So it can make people with disabilities feel invisible and othered, and you all hit on both of those things. And you hit on more. You mentioned that, you know, their existence makes people feel uncomfortable. Why would the mother need to be embarrassed? And yes, it was a teachable moment in that you could teach the child how to interact appropriately with someone who is different. And that is not to avert eye contact. It means just treat everyone in a similar way. You see someone with a disability, say hello. That's how you treat people without disabilities or visible disabilities, I should say. Great. Here's another example. You're in the waiting room at your doctor's office and observe a white woman approach a black woman who has long braided hair. The white woman asks, "Is that your real hair?" As she begins touching the braids. What's the intention here? This one might be a little trickier to figure out with respect to intention. All right, if you have answers, go ahead and hit enter. Yes, so it was assumed that her hair was not real. It's to somehow compliment the woman on her hair and learn about the hairstyle. So curiosity. White woman assumes she has the right to black woman's body. Yes, think it's flattering. Intention, probably to show that she thinks her hair is beautiful. Curiosity, complimentary. Some folks are getting into message, an impact. All right, so folks are starting to get to impact. If other folks have thoughts about what the message is, please go ahead and enter those in chat. And things that are coming up in your answers are curiosity, interest, and then also some folks just want to make a connection that way. So how might this be interpreted or heard by the Black woman? So let's go back here. I'm an exotic pet. Yes. Impact is invading personal space. Someone says you would never touch someone else's hair without their permission, although I'm white and people have touched my curls without my permission. It's beautiful hair, but yes, Lisa points out inherent power imbalance. That's absolutely right. Spot on. Impact. Black women don't have personal space. Black women can't have long hair, right? Feeling other makes the other person feel othered and exotic, not normal, right? Which feels invalidating. Yes, Johanna is saying white women feels entitled to Black women's body, time, and space. No bodily autonomy, says Michelle. That's right. And then impact, feeling less than human. Spot on, folks. White people are entitled to touch Black bodies is the clear message that is sent. And this has been something that's been going on for 300 years, right? It objectifies, exotifies, alienates, and invades privacy. So a simple act like that might on the surface seem harmless or to the individual initiating it as a way to connect with another human can have this horrible impact. And this is a great example of the difference between intention versus impact. So thank you for those wonderful answers. Let's move on to a few others. And we're not going to have scenarios. We're just going to have the microaggression itself. The idea of I don't see color, or there is only one race, the human race. This is that idea of being colorblind. What's the impact here? We're going to focus specifically on impact rather than intention. And feel free to just enter an answer or a thought into chat whenever you want. All right. Lisa says, I don't recognize your struggles. We're back in the Band-Aid aisle. That's right. Erasure or denial of lived experience. Absolutely. Erasure of different cultures and identities. Whiteness is probably the viewpoint. Yes, typically that's right. Showing that you don't value folks, diversity isn't acknowledged. So yes, there's one here that is a couple of them here that are particularly important, and that is people of color do not live the lives of white people. And to say, I don't see you as a racialized person in a white dominated culture is erasing your identity, is not seeing your lived reality. And I use myself as an example as a gay trans man. My sexual orientation, my gender identity is very salient to me. And if someone doesn't see that about me, then I don't feel seen as a whole human because these things have informed my worldview and my life. My much older relative told us everyone would be white in heaven. Wow, that is incredible. I was raised to think that there was no gender in heaven. Yeah, so the fact that someone would mention something like this tells me that they do see/feel the difference, right? And the reality is we see gender, we see race, we see age, we see all of these things when the moment we look at someone, whether we're conscious of it or not. So to say I don't see color is just flat out incorrect, inaccurate. Now, you can have an approach where you see color, but you treat people equitably. That's different than not seeing color. All right, what about this one? Saying to someone who is LGBTQ+, what you do in the privacy of your bedroom is not my business. I can't remember the number of times that I heard this back when I first started coming out 20 years ago in college. So what's the message here? What's the damage being done by this particular microaggression? Yes, Ojana, thank you for pointing that out. Not just looking at someone, which assumes everyone can see. That's right. We also judge based on what we hear when folks talk. Absolutely. How many times, and actually there was one of the microaggressions earlier, you don't sound Black. So we do pick up on various things if we have to utilize our other senses. So yes, someone says reduces everything to sex. Yes, if it's hidden, then it's fine. Don't bring it out in the open. Yeah, it's kind of like don't ask, don't tell sort of thing. I don't want to see it. I accept it as long as it's not in my face. And I heard that a ton of times too. It's always about sex. That's right. So let's think about what else is in the LGBTQIAA+ community. Asexuality has been something that's been put under the umbrella of the LGBTQ+ community. So not all people who are attracted to folks of the same gender or same sex experience sexual attraction. Yes, it says what LGBTQ folks do in their sex lives is inherently wrong. Yeah, there's definitely some shame associated with this. Let's see, you're not a person, sex defines you. Yes, right. So this heavy emphasis on sexuality. Yeah, I don't want to think about, well, anything. Right. Okay. What about referring to the United States as a country of immigrants? What's the message here or the impact? This is actually something that I said many years ago as a counter argument to someone holding very, very stringent views on immigration in this country. They were basically saying we don't want immigrants. But then later in life, I realized, wow, this is highly problematic. And let's see what you came up with. Yeah, it assumes that there weren't people already here. The impact is that Indigenous peoples don't count and are unimportant. It erases First Nations people. Yes, absolutely. Erasure of our Native populations erases and ignores Native folks and Black folks who were enslaved. That's right. Some folks did not immigrate here by choice. That's fantastic. Let's see. Oh, interesting. Someone privately says, interesting in that as a European living in the US, I've had people tell me that they don't mean me when they talk about immigrants. Yes, so and that probably is related to the power imbalance between folks of European ancestry and non-European ancestry. So there's some racism there embedded in that particular comment. Yeah, it doesn't recognize the cultural differences that make the country diverse. Assimilation, yes, implied expectation of assimilation to a certain standard, which is a white supremacist perspective, that there's one way that's better than all other ways. Denying their prejudice against immigrants by saying our country is considered founded on immigration. Right. Great. What about asking a person of color, what do your people think? What's the impact here? Yes. Moon says tokenizing, right? So you are the Black person. What do you think as a spokesperson for your people? Othering says all people of the race think exactly the same. Yes, that is, and we speak for all blank people, someone says. Right, so it's completely homogenizing a vastly diverse group or groups of people and putting an unfair burden on one person to serve as that spokesperson for that entire population. How about a person who is of average weight complains about feeling fat and feeling disgusted about that? What's the potential impact or the message here being sent? Yes. So that person is, even though they're not fat, are saying something about bodies, body shaming, judging other people about their bodies, right? Tells me that my fat body is inherently disgusting. The person thinks that fat people are disgusting. Right. So thank you for sharing, Kate. Oh God, this has happened to me so much. The message is you are even more gross. So if I am of average weight and I feel disgusted by my weight, how disgusted am I of you if you are a fat person? And by the way, fat is a term that is being reclaimed in the body size movement. And so that is the word that I use out of respect for fat people who are reclaiming that word. Plus, if you use things like overweight, then we're dealing with white supremacist culture again. Who's deciding what's overweight? Is it members who are fat or people who are not fat saying that being a certain weight is a bad thing? Right, fat shaming. Great, thank you for sharing. How about this one? Saying to an elderly person, I'm surprised you even know about TikTok, let alone how to use it. What's the message here? And a funny story, the first time that I gave a workshop on these issues, one of my participants said, oh my God, I just said that pretty much word for word the same thing to my grandma at Christmas. Right, so elderly people can't be tech savvy. You're too old to learn new things. Older people can't keep up with the world. Yes, so old equals ignorant, incapable, boring. Definitely rooted in ageism, Laura. Technology is only for young people, right? Or they're not interested in new things, right? They're not smart and incapable of learning, right? So this very ageist perspective, and we just know that that's not true. Now there may be trends. I know that my mother really struggles with technology, but it's simply not true for everyone. All right, the last one here is referring to someone you dislike as crazy or insane. So in this situation, it's not, oh my God, that was so crazy when something unbelievable happened. This is using it as an insult directed at an individual. So what's the potential harm here? There's a question, how do you respond though when someone jokes about it themselves? Like when I say, oh, I'm too old to figure that out, jokingly. That is still a microaggression, and I have an experience with that when I was meeting with my temporary supervisor, who is the senior associate dean at in my college at OSU. I was getting really frustrated with my phone. I was trying to schedule an appointment, I think our follow-up meeting, and I was having challenges with it. And I made the comment, oh, I feel so old right now. And that haunted me. It still haunts me because I never went back and said, you know what, I said a thing and I realized it was rooted in ageist beliefs that people above a certain age can't learn technology. I did not do that. And so, it bothers me that I didn't follow up and call myself out. But that's an opportunity, and that's the same thing. Even if we're joking with ourselves, it's still a microaggression. So yes, this last one here, stigmatizes mental illness. Yes, mental illness is bad, and anyone that has a mental illness is bad. And it minimizes the gravity of mental illness, sure. Making your judgment into fact towards the person, right? Yes, so it's not based on fact unless you have some sort of clinical diagnosis that you can refer to. Rachel points out neurodivergent people are all unlikable and or aggressive and or violent, which are all myths. That's right. Let's see, mental illness shouldn't be a punchline. You're correct. So linking mental illness with being a bad person or aberrant. Right, so this is a challenging one because crazy, insane, wacko, nuts, and the list goes on of the synonyms that we use in these scenarios. They might not seem like much to most people, but for those who have been institutionalized or for those individuals who have been taunted throughout their lifetimes for having mental health conditions, being called crazy or insane in a derogatory way, this can be triggering for them. And it's important to be mindful. We don't know who's listening when we talk, and we don't know what their lived realities have been. So it's important that we're very careful in how we curate our language. And it's not about people being snowflakes. I really hate that term. There are reasons why people get offended. A significant amount of our language is rooted in some sort of ism. And it can be a single word, it can be a belief that takes the form of a phrase, or the environment. We experience these things on a regular basis. So it is important that we're digging into our language and being very intentional with our words. Yeah, it diminishes mental illness without knowing someone's circumstances. So yeah, maybe this person does have a mental health condition and you're further stigmatizing. Let's see, once I started trying to change my language habits, I realized just how common and insidious ableist language is. Yes, it's like this Pandora's box, Johanna. Exactly. Once you start to critically evaluate what words are coming out of our mouths, it's almost like, wow, an avalanche starts and you're like, oh my God, there's so many things in our language, things that I say on a regular basis that have these really ugly roots, and I want to change that. Paula, thank you for sharing. Your sister died by suicide, and whenever someone says, oh, I would just shoot myself casually, it takes a minute. So yes, so language like blown away, I was made aware that actually could be potentially triggering for folks who have been to war and have seen people literally blown away. So there's violence also in our language that can be problematic. And thank you, Paula, for sharing that with us. All right, any other questions or final thoughts on any of the microaggressions that we've covered? So that's a good question, Carly. Would you say using a sentence like, quote, this was a crazy day would also be a microaggression? So this is one that I've struggled with myself as a person who is bipolar, I have an anxiety disorder. I consider myself neurodisabled. I was never taunted or crazy or insane was never something that was directed at me as a derogatory concept. So I don't get triggered when the word comes up, but I do take offense to someone using it as an insult directed at an individual person. So this is actually a really important point, that just because I'm saying something is a microaggression here, it doesn't mean that everyone is going to experience it as a microaggression. So someone who is a person of color might not be offended by a colorblind argument. Someone who is gay might not be offended by the comment in example number 2. But we do know that there are individuals who find all of these things problematic. And that's really what we have to just keep in mind. I would rather be conservative and not say something, even though it might not be offensive to everyone, than say it and happen to say it in front of someone who is harmed by it. Yes, sometimes you just have to reflect and find a different way to say something. And that's why it's really important to be able to recognize common microaggressions. So now that I know that using crazy as an insult is harmful to folks who maybe struggle with mental health issues, I can just identify a synonym that doesn't hold that same meaning. So how about, well, first of all, let's just not insult people, but we could just replace crazy or insane with that's wild, or identify some other words and then tuck those in your pocket and have those ready so that you're not reacting to saying something, you're being proactive. Yes, Johanna, there are so many layers to the word crazy. It's been weaponized against women as a group, i.e. the crazy ex-girlfriend stereotype. Yes, and one of the examples I gave earlier, this idea of hysteria was used to attack women and to basically discredit women as emotional, as basket cases. Right. Yes, struggle. So Tori is recognized struggle with this type of language as well. So someone privately says, seems like we may not have much to say without causing a microaggression. I'm going to disagree with that because there are so many other ways that we can communicate that do not have these words or phrases or assumptions that are rooted in bias or oppression. There are many, many other alternatives. And again, I think as someone said, yeah, Paula, you just have to reflect and find a different way to say it. And that's why doing these sorts of programs by highlighting these common microaggressions, you can then think of ways to communicate this idea in a different way. So rather than saying the US is a country of immigrants, you can come up with a different way to make an argument for immigration rather than completely eliminating Native or Indigenous folks from our history, and not just our history, but that they're still here, that colonialism is still happening. All right, so I want to spend the last few minutes, right, thanks, Paula. Just got to do the work. That's right. You just have to do the work. And yes, the work can be tiring at times, but I prefer to approach this from the goal of not using offensive language. And really, when someone says to me that word or phrase is offensive, usually there's a good reason. Usually there's a root to that is meaningful. I don't see people saying, oh, I'm offended by that word for no good reason. All right, so let's look at some strategies for when you initiate a microaggression. And I, first of all, would like for you to approach it from a grateful mindset. So when someone sits you down and says, hey, you did a thing or you said a thing that was harmful to me, they're giving you a gift, the gift of accountability. They're saying, hey, you know, you got a little lettuce in your teeth from lunch. Hey, you got a little racism or ageism in your teeth. I'm going to explain to you how that was harmful to me. So be grateful. They're giving you a gift. When they're talking to you, be an active listener. Now, active listening is not something that we are born to do. We have to cultivate this as a skill. And it involves listening to understand, not to respond. So our mind is completely in the present moment and we're hearing everything the person says. We're comprehending it. We are reflecting that back to them so that they feel heard. And in order to do this, we have to maintain an open mind. We have to recognize, okay, this person had a lived reality and I need to better understand it. And not only that, got to believe them. No exceptions. Whatever the harm is, it was done, regardless of your intention, whether you can see their perspective or not. You have to believe that they are harmed and accept that. And utilize perspective taking and empathy to connect with their feelings. And this is really helpful, especially if you can't personally relate to the specific example. This happened to me 2-3 years ago. A colleague sat me down and said, hey, you said a thing, it was upsetting to me and here's why. And I couldn't make the connection because I wasn't exactly sure what I had said, but I was pretty sure it wasn't positioned in a way to be damaging, but it didn't matter what I thought, the harm was done. So I had to believe this person and accept their reality. And empathy can help us connect with the same feeling. So I just imagine what this person would feel like in that situation. And then think of a time when I felt the same way. And then I can relate to them on that level rather than having to relate to the experience itself. And empathy is also something we have to cultivate. It doesn't come naturally for a lot of people. Some folks are more empathetic than others. But there are ways that you can cultivate not only active listening skills, but also empathy. Rachel says, I think it also goes to show that there is so much baked into our language and culture that is built and shaped from our white dominant supremacist patriarchal society. Yes, it does take practice to get out of it. I know that when I was a kid, saying someone was gay or calling something gay was akin to saying it was stupid or weak. Same thing for me. And now I don't hear that insult as much anymore. It still exists, but I think that the trend has passed quite a bit. We've practiced our way away from that. Yes. It's hard to think of someone as more than just being sensitive. All right. So when the person has explained what's going on, your job is to listen and understand. Listen for comprehension. Then when it's your turn to respond, first and foremost, do not get defensive or focus only on your intention. Remember, intention versus impact. You have a broken vase. It doesn't matter if you accidentally dropped it or you threw it on the ground intentionally. We have to focus on the harm. Also recognize that this person went through some emotional labor, not only to get to you, but also to go through this process. The person who gave me the gift of accountability most recently has an anxiety disorder, and they waited weeks to talk to me about it. And I could see that something was wrong. And I ended up asking for a meeting to discuss what was going on. They had talked to various people in their life. They had endured a lot of of suffering over this one comment that I had made. And it was very difficult for this person to even sit down with me. They were almost visibly shaking. Their voice was shaking. So it took a lot for them to even just sit down with me. So recognize that labor and thank them for being generous with you. Thank them for sitting you down. You know, I recognize that this is really difficult for you, and I really appreciate you bringing it to my awareness. I don't want to harm you in that way. And I can see how you would have felt harmed by my comments. So that's that take responsibility. We need to be accountable for our actions. And that will go a long way in this conversation. And then follow that up by thoughtfully and authentically apologizing. And you will know, or they will know, the difference between an authentic versus a saving face kind of apology. And then finally, ask how to make it right or to prevent it from happening again. This is something that is very dependent upon the relationship and the circumstance. It may not be something that you need to make right. It just maybe needs to be acknowledged, and then you can move on. Or let's say that someone says, hey, you used this word and it was problematic for me. And then you could say, okay, what are some other words that I could use instead of that one that would be affirming to you rather than offensive? Usually I show a Brene Brown video, Rachel is pointing out, on the difference between sympathy and empathy. I highly recommend it. It's a very brief video. But Brene Brown is a fantastic speaker and author. And yes, she talks a lot about empathy in much of her work. Oh, performative morality. Yes. Especially on social media. Absolutely. We don't have time to watch this video, but I'm going to encourage you to check it out on your own. She gives a great example of a behavior that she engaged in that I think 1 or 2 years later, somebody finally called her out on it. And she gives a fantastic outline of how you go about responding to the situation and how to give a very thoughtful and authentic apology. Okay, so after the conversation, so we have our broken vase, we've put it back together, or at least we're attempting to. Be gentle and forgiving with yourself. It happens to everyone. It's going to happen to you again. You might need to accept that the damage may be long lasting, or it could be permanent. You might have a piece missing out of your vase for the rest of your relationship. Or alternatively, you could put it back together and it becomes a work of art and your relationship is even stronger than it was before. Having these conversations does have the potential to bring you closer, to trust each other more deeply. And the link will be is embedded in my presentation slides. So you'll have that there as well. So really importantly, make a commitment to make a change and then follow through. If someone says, you know, I don't like it when you use that word around me, don't use that word anymore. And your actions will speak very loudly. And then educate yourself about the issue if you're unfamiliar with it. And note that it's not the person's responsibility to be your educator. This happens a lot for marginalized individuals who are subjected to microaggressions, that they all of a sudden find themselves in the teacher role, that they have to give you, a 101 course on their identity. That is not a burden that they should have to bear. If you want to ask questions, first get permission. Say, hey, I don't know much about that. Would you mind if I ask a few questions? And then give them the opportunity to say yes or no, rather than just bombarding them with a whole bunch of questions. And some next steps, you're going to get that handout. So I recommend that you review all the examples in the handout. You can read a book or tons of content on websites about microaggressions. Diversify your network. If you get to know people from different identity groups, you'll start to see other microaggressions and actually connect the dots. It has a really different impact when you talk to, say, a Black woman who's had her hair touched over and over again than me telling you that it happens to Black women all the time. Very different impact, but you'll learn more about lived realities and the different challenges that folks face. Have conversations with people about what you're learning about microaggressions and other issues, and then level up, attend another webinar or workshop. about microaggressions, or you could take the next step, which is how do I respond when I witness bias incidents or when I witness a microaggression? What are some steps and tools that I can use? These two books I rely on heavily for my microaggressions programs. The Daryl Wing Sue book is kind of the Bible, the academic Bible of microaggressions. And then I've pulled content from Maura Cullen's book. And finally, thank you so much for your participation. Thank you for having me today. I've thoroughly enjoyed this session. And I believe Moon wants to cover a few things.
Thank you to everyone for attending, participating, listening, and sharing. Thanks especially to Dr. Taylor for a really useful, practical, and engaging session, as well as the NASIC Continuing Education Committee for their technical support. The CEC Continuing Education Committee will also share Dr. Taylor's slides with the attendees over email. So you'll have access to all of Dr. Taylor's links and so on, and the videos there as well. So this is really just the start of these conversations. Please be on the lookout for the equity and inclusion webinars on the topic of burnout, and then gender inequality on Wikipedia, both in May. So coming up really soon. I don't think the announcement's gone out yet, but will be shortly. And if you're attending the NASIC annual conference in early June, there will be 2 vision sessions, one on the new data collection focus and analytics by publishers and library service providers, and the implications of this transition on privacy and intellectual freedom, and a panel on the ins and outs of diversity, equity, and inclusion work in libraries. So please check those out as well. And finally, although the focus of today's webinar centered around microaggressions, we all know there's a lot of other intersectionalities. Please let us know what type of content is relevant to you, or perhaps you might have a great webinar topic you'd like to lead. So please let us know by filling out the survey after this webinar concludes, which is now. So thanks again, and take care, everyone.